With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say, no, you move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope. We're on basically every platform now, so if you're not watching the show, that's really on you. That's your fault. So we thank you so much for being with us tonight, and we do have a special program. We have a guest on, as we try to do on Thursdays, and we have a really important guest, and it's somebody that I probably wouldn't have run across normally, but he was here as a guest speaker at Faulkner this week, so we would like to welcome Dr. Lou Butterfield. Welcome to the program, Dr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, we are certainly glad to have you with us, and one thing that I would like just to give to the audience, because you know I've been listening to you speak at chapel for a couple days, so I know a little bit about your background, but they're unfamiliar with it. So if you could just kind of give us a brief background of how you got to do what you're doing with WeFightPorn.com and also with Christian broadcasting.
Okay, I got really involved in the WeFightPorn.com because of my own family. Mm-hmm. I had a brother-in-law, a son-in-law, and actually a son that got involved. And my son has gone through major rehab. In fact, he is now qualified as a therapist in sexual addiction abuse. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in it because of that. And it actually kind of changed the focus of my life. I've spent a long time now, 10 years, traveling the country talking about basically the dangers of internet pornography and how people can be helped. Right.
Well, it's something that is very timely. And the thing is, especially looking at things through a Christian worldview, sexual immorality is nothing new at all. But the advent of on-demand pornography that it's free, it's at the click of a button, it's in your home. I mean, if you have internet, you have access to it. And I think that's something that society as a whole is kind of struggling to keep up with, because that's been a massive change that's really only taken place. I think the first free porn sites started popping up, about the mid-2000s, so this is a very recent thing that we're, as a society, kind of struggling to catch up with and to figure out how to handle. One of the things that you talk about specifically is pornography as an addiction. So to give us a little bit of background, could you explain to us a little bit how, from a biological and scientific standpoint, how addiction works and why it's so difficult to break that once you're in that cycle?
Okay, let me say first that pornography today is not your granddad or your dad's pornography.
Right.
Back when I was growing up, if you looked at anything pornographic, it was still pictures. Mm-hmm. Well, with the advent of the internet, moving sound video has changed all that. And the more someone looks at that, the more you're drawn to that, and you actually change your brain. It rewires your brain with the neurotransmitters in your brain and all the chemicals that you have naturally. For example, dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that's found in the midbrain. It's where your pleasure center is. And the more you see something pleasurable, the more it makes a deep groove in your brain.
Yeah, and I am curious about that, because I've heard you and other people that are really focused on this say similar things about how the new pornography, where it is moving pictures, where there's sound involved, all of that, why is that so much more addicting? Like, what from a psychological standpoint draws people into that so much more than looking at a picture of a naked woman, for example? Because, I mean, looking at a picture of a naked woman, just about any man's going to enjoy that. But why does the advent of video, moving pictures, and then sound, why does that make such a difference?
Well, two things. One is fantasy is involved, and fantasy is something you don't have. So let's say you're a married man or a woman, doesn't matter. You have in your spouse what you have. And when you fantasize, and everybody does, I think, to a certain degree, you don't fantasize about what you have. For example, my son's a therapist, and when he fantasizes, he doesn't fantasize about being a therapist. He's already a therapist.
That wouldn't be a fantasy.
That wouldn't be a fantasy. So he says what he fantasizes about is playing ball in the NFL and scoring a touchdown in a big game. He's never had that. He would love to do that. He played football in high school, was all state, but he never went to the pros. So he fantasizes about that. When it comes to pornography, men and women alike fantasize about what they don't have. And so if you like, I don't know how specific to be on this, but if you like red-headed women, and your wife's a blonde, you may fantasize about a sexual activity with a red-headed woman. Or body parts, if one is larger than the other, or you compare it to your wife, fantasy takes you places that you can't go any other place. And the internet really feeds your fantasy. You can find anything you want any time of the day or night, whether it's totally perverted, whether it's threesomes, whether it's group, whether it's bestiality, whatever is there, you have access to. And the more you look at that, the more your brain kicks out dopamine, and it becomes pleasurable to you, and you get to the point where that's more pleasurable than the real activity with your spouse.
Yeah, that's one thing that I actually kind of wanted to ask about, because I know that in the speech this morning that you went over, you were talking about the different dopamine levels and how that's really what sort of triggers the addiction and causes people to seek after something like that. And one of the things that you talked about were dopamine percentages, and you showed that there, for example, marijuana was about 260, smoking a cigarette was what, 150?
Yeah, 150, 160.
Right, so you're actually going above the percentage level that your brain can normally produce without some kind of chemical induction there. And so when it comes to that, like, why is porn, which isn't chemical based at all, it's just, visual and sound, how does it get you to the ridiculous level of dopamine that you can get from watching pornography? Why is that?
Well, one of the things, again, is fantasy. You get something that you haven't had in another way. Dopamine is in your brain naturally. God gives you dopamine. It's in your midbrain. It's your pleasure center. And every single thing you do can be judged by the potential of dopamine. For example, my son talked about winning or scoring the highest, or scoring a touchdown in a game. The highest level he's wanted to go to. Well, you can get 100% dopamine release off doing that. Now, if he scored a lot of touchdowns, the next time he wouldn't get 100%. He might get 90, 80, 50. But when you go to pornography, it's so unique and so novel that you have different experiences every time you look at it. If you are into redheaded women, you can only look at so many redheaded women doing whatever they do. And then you fantasize and you go further than that, because you're always wanting more. And the more you have, the more you want. You get stimulated through that. Your dopamine kicks in, and it just rises and rises and rises.
So one of the percentage that you gave was actually equal to crack cocaine, which was 1,100%.
1,100%. There are only two things that we know of that allow you to have 1,100% dopamine. And I mean, that is just off the chart. And one is smoking crack cocaine, and the other is acting out to full motion, full audio pornography.
And if you could just give me a little insight here, because this was a question that I had listening to you earlier today. When it comes to the percentage levels, like, how do you get those numbers? Is that something that you get through brain scan, or is it like, how do they determine like how much that dopamine is?
Brain scans are extremely important. And the Amen Clinic It's funny that that's their real name, Amen.
Right.
But they specialize in brain scans, and they can see brain activity. They can see how you're stimulated, how much you're stimulated, how much you're not stimulated, whether you're enjoying something, whether you're not enjoying something, whether it's actually interfering with your brain process or not, and that's how they come up with those levels.
So, since we've been talking about it and equating it to drug use, would you say that pornography is at the same level of drugs? Because I know personally, I don't know what you've heard, but I hear the argument all the time. It's like, well, look, it's not hurting anybody, and it's not like I'm, doing heroin or something like that. And so a lot of people tend to downplay it that way and look at it as, just kind of a guilty pleasure. People that don't have necessarily moral scruples about it would just say that it's just like, eating chocolate or something like that. And so would you say that pornography is actually as harmful as some of the drugs we're talking about?
Absolutely. Let me mention the chocolate thing. I'm glad you brought that up. I was actually in court the other day with a young man that was caught with 65 downloads of child porn. And the prosecuting attorney was making fun of that. One of the defenses was he was addicted to porn. And he said, well, I could be addicted to chocolate. Well, I don't know anybody that's addicted to chocolate. We actually say we are.
I'm borderline.
I understand.
I'll tell you that.
But if you're actually in addiction,
right.
Addiction is something you cannot stop without help.
Okay.
So if I'm addicted to chocolate, it means all I think about is chocolate, all I want is chocolate, all I eat is chocolate, I spend my money on chocolate, I spend my time on chocolate. I don't know anybody that does that. That doesn't mean we don't like chocolate.
Sure.
But it's a lot different to an addictive substance or process. You start taking drugs and it physically changes your body. It physically alters your brain. It rewires the pleasure center so you're looking for that particular thing. So it's very important to understand that process addiction, and process is like, it's what you do. It's like gambling, pornography, even exercising can be an addiction. I know people that run marathons all the time because they like the high. And you hear about a runner's high. I'm not against that necessarily, but if all you think about and all you train for is your next marathon and it has an effect on your life, then it rises to the level of addiction. If somebody's shooting up heroin, if somebody's doing crack cocaine, it takes over their life and therefore becomes an addiction.
All right, so that does lead me to another question. There are drug abusers that are known as high functioning, to where they are abusing drugs and they are addicted to drugs, but they have done so in such a way and they're competent enough that they can kind of make it appear as though that they're just like anybody else. You would never know that they were, this person was an alcoholic or this person was addicted to different drugs. I mean, some of them it's a little harder because there's physical side effects, but what would you, so you would say that this is something that can also be done with pornography?
Can you be high functioning and still watch pornography?
Right. Basically, could you be a person that is really addicted to pornography and then nobody would be able to tell?
Yes, you could. Because a lot of times pornography is called the secret sin. So you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I recently dealt with a lady that did that. She got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, locked herself in the bathroom, and from 2 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning, every night, she got on the internet and looked at porn. Nobody knew. Her husband actually was a counselor, and he didn't even know she'd been doing that.
Wow.
So it's not like you have a physical side effect. Like if you're drunk, people can tell that.
Right.
If you're looped out on some kind of drug, people can tell that. But looking at me, you don't know if I've looked at porn. I don't know if you've looked at porn. There are no physical side effects until you try to withdraw from that, which is very, very interesting. If you have been hooked on porn and you stop at cold turkey, which you really need to do, but you need to do it with help, you can have the same side effects as trying to get off alcohol. You can have the shakes, you can have sweats, it can be awful just getting off pornography.
Well, and that's one thing that I was going to ask about. Some of the arguments may have, because we've talked a lot about the psychological ramifications of something like that, but someone still might make the argument that it's still not as bad because you don't have somebody that, because they watch too much porn, their teeth are falling out like you do with methamphetamines or something. So are there actual physical side effects to something like this?
There are physical side effects in that the more you watch porn, and let's be clear, watching porn just doesn't mean looking at a video. It means acting out, giving yourself a sexual release.
Right.
The more you do that to porn, you have a tendency to do it more and more often. The novelty's there, the frequency's there,
Mm-hmm.
the wanting to see more and more in different situations is there. And if you continue to do that, there is a lot of research that shows for a man, if you're in your mid-20s, you can actually develop erectile dysfunction, and nothing can help you. A carload of Viagra can't help you. So there are physical effects down the road, but you're walking down the street, nobody knows that.
So is that because I've also seen articles, and I've seen it on both sides. I've seen articles that say that erectile dysfunction is higher amongst people that try this. I've seen the opposite, where it says that there's no proof that that is taking place. And so is it just because your, let's say, threshold of being stimulated is so high that under normal circumstances it can't reach that level, and that's why you're having the erectile dysfunction? Or what's the reasoning behind
Well,
that?
sometimes it's even the actual abuse of your body. I dealt with a young man, he was probably in his early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
who was acting out to pornography 20, 25 times a day. I didn't even know that was possible.
No,
But if
wouldn't think so.
if you're abusing yourself, and that's what it is,
Yeah.
20, 25 times a day, you are physically going to hurt yourself. And I think that's what he did. He actually got married. It didn't last very long, and I wasn't surprised because he got more pleasure out of the variety and what he saw on the internet than he did from his own wife.
You know, that's one of the things that I actually did want to talk to you about, because one of the things that was most jarring to me this morning, and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about it, is I would have thought, and this is the way that I really did think up until I heard you talking about it today, that because God designed us to be a certain way, and because God designed us to be, you know, one man and one woman for life, that the threshold of dopamine or however else you want to describe it would actually be a lot higher with that design as opposed to something that is unnatural like pornography. And so my question in that is, like, I don't even know what I want to ask, but like, how do you handle that? Because I think there's a lot of Christians, men and women, that think, well, that's, you know, the way that it really ought to be, and then, you know, the porn is something that's difficult for me, but it's basically a cheap way to try to get to that threshold. And you're saying actually it's many, many times more than that. And so how do you function with that if you're somebody that has an addiction like this and is trying to come back from that and you know, get rid of that addiction, hopefully find a spouse, and how do you handle that?
Okay, a couple of things. One thing is I actually dealt with a couple, and the man was the one that was addicted to porn,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually physically taped pictures of nude women to the head of his bed. And he did that so he could be aroused enough to have sexual relations with his wife.
Right.
Now, why his wife put up with that, I have absolutely no idea. But he had gotten to the point where a woman wouldn't do it for him. I want to say something about a question a while ago, too.
Yes, sir.
The erectile dysfunction, if you look that up on the internet, and of course you can find anything on the internet, but if you look to decent sites, Dr. Pat Carnes has done all kinds of work in sexual addiction. In fact, he wrote the very first book on it back 30 years ago. But there are numerous videos from doctors who've dealt with this that talk about erectile dysfunction. I think on my computer now, when I hold these seminars, I probably have 10 videos from doctors that say this is real, this is the reasoning, and it makes a very good case.
Well, I know that since the onset of this, that we've had much higher rates of erectile dysfunction, and it's been taking place in ages lower than we had seen previously. And so that was one of the big arguments that this is unfortunately taking place, especially with the number of people that we have, unfortunately been engaging in this kind of thing. But a lot of people would try to chalk that up to just it being because it's Christians and they're just trying to push their religion, and that's really all it amounts to, and they're just kind of making this up and hoping the science backs it up. But some of the people that I've seen, psychologists that talk about it, one guy's even an atheist, and he's saying, look, I'm not saying that there's anything morally wrong with this. I'm just saying that from a physical standpoint, it's incredibly harmful.
Absolutely. I have heard from and read a number of people who don't believe in God at all,
right,
the atheists, that say from a physical, practical standpoint, this is what's happening to your body. It's not normal to act out several times a day, many times each week, and you are physically going to hurt yourself. And just from a common sense standpoint, that sounds right to me.
Well, and one thing that you showed this morning that's kind of physical proof of that is you had a bunch of different pictures of different brain scans, and what was really kind of astounding is you showed the brain scan, healthy brains compared to drug users and that kind of thing, and the scans were eerily similar between someone who was addicted to pornography and some other drugs, marijuana, cocaine, that kind of thing. And so I think the science is pretty much in that this is not a good thing for anybody to do, regardless of whether or not you have moral scruples about it.
Right. There are even some states who have made a law that said pornography addiction is a health hazard.
Right.
And that's pretty revealing. And these aren't necessarily Christian lawmakers. They see the evidence, they see what's going on, and they've decided it is a health hazard to act out to porn as much as people are doing.
Now, one thing that you've discussed, and I just wanted to see if there are any differences here. Typically, what we've done is we've been talking about it from sort of a gender-neutral standpoint about how it affects men and women. Are there any differences in the way that it affects men and women?
Well, yes, there are, but not as many as you might think. It's kind of like alcohol. Years ago, people thought alcoholism was a male disease.
Right.
And they didn't think women could have it at all. Well, now they know that it's about 50-50. When you start dealing with couples, many times it's the woman that's addicted, but a lot of times the women don't want to talk about it. There's too much blame and too much shame when it comes to a woman. They don't want to admit that's a problem.
Right.
But it is a problem. Like the one I talked about a while ago. Mm-hmm. Got up at 2 o'clock every morning, and went from 2 to 6 watching porn. There are physical differences, obviously, in men and women, but let me tell you one of the changes.
Okay.
The younger women are being more influenced by the look of the nude body and those kinds of things. It used to be, well, women are all emotional and men are all physical. The younger the woman, my opinion is, I don't have proof of this, but if somebody is under 40, if you're a female under 40, you're more attracted to someone at least as much physically as you are any other way. A man looks at a woman and he goes, wow, that looks really nice. Usually, the argument is a woman is more emotional. Well, now that's really changing. I had a lady tell me not too long ago that the school she taught at a school, and she said at our school there's a racquetball court. And you can watch people playing racquetball. She said, I go over there because, this is her words, I get turned on watching those hairy-legged men play racquetball. That astounded me.
That does me
too.
Who
would have thought that?
Right. Especially the legs. That seems like an especially not sexy part of the male body.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I'm glad that she at least recognized that was something that was an issue for her.
But when you get into this, you find out there are a lot of weird stuff out there.
Well, I'm sure it is, and actually, I'm sure that porn contributes to that. If you need something else to get stimulated,
absolutely.
And one thing that you brought up was child pornography.
Unbelievable.
My guess would be, because that's something that is, regardless of where you are religiously, spiritually, morally, we pretty much all agree that that's one of the worst things that a person can do. So my question is, how many of these people started with what we would consider normal pornography and then graduated up to child pornography needing stimulation? Like, is that typically the case for people that have child porn?
See, I think that I don't really have any proof of that.
Okay.
But my opinion is, with all the people I've dealt with, you can only watch so much porn. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
You watch all you can watch. You get all the human body parts, you get all the nationalities, you get everything, and finally you're just so saturated you don't get the high you used to get. So you have to go to something more novel. That, to me, is where you go down the road to child porn. And even past child porn, people get into animals, they get into bestiality.
Right.
So it goes lower and lower and lower. And it's just kind of scary.
So it's like a coke addict that has to use double the amount that he used
Right.
to get the same high.
Or someone starts on a lower level drug like marijuana. I know that's very controversial,
Right.
but I still think that's a gateway drug. I think there's plenty of evidence to prove that. The brain scans prove that it is affecting your brain, but when you do as much marijuana as you can and you're not getting the high you want, then you go to a higher level. This morning I showed 10 ladies who have been in a therapy program for a year,
Right.
and they will tell you, almost all of them will tell you, they started out smoking weed and they started doing alcohol, and then they progressed until they're into meth, they're shooting up heroin, they're shooting up cocaine, and they have messed up their lives because it is a progression.
Well, you know, I think on that note, there's an awful lot of young Christians that, though I appreciate that their heart is in the right place, I think they mistakenly believe that it's something that it's a vice and they'd rather not do it, but it's okay because all that will go away once I do get married. And I think that that's, you know, frankly, I don't think it's, you know, overstating it to say I think that's a trap the devil puts in our way, specifically because, you know, that's just something we just have to wait on and then it'll solve all our problems.
Right, I agree. If God lets you have 100% dopamine release,
Right.
and 100% is all you can have naturally, so your very best pleasure you've ever had, you can have 100% dopamine. But you get married and you've been into porn and your dopamine has been going up and up and up. Actually, it starts out high and drops. You can have up to 1100% dopamine release when you start watching moving pornography. And then it's like any other addiction, you have to have more and more and more. But if you're dealing with moving pornography and you've watched a lot of it, so you really are addicted, and let's say you've averaged out at 500% dopamine.
Sure.
That's 5 times more pleasure than you can get with your wife. You're not ever going to get 500% because God allows you to have 100% in a natural way. So you have to do something else to increase the pleasure. And that's the fallacy. A lot of people have come to me and said, well, my fiance is into porn and we're going to get married and all that's going to go away. It never happens that way. It never happens that way.
Well, and I think it's obvious that you've got that issue, but then you also have the other side of the coin, which is the spouse would obviously feel inadequate at that point, which is something that I would be concerned with, is that, you know, they would feel like whatever they're doing isn't enough or something like that, and I mean, that could cause real problems in the marriage.
Oh, it does. That is a standard reaction to a spouse of someone who's doing porn. Well, if you just put out more, I wouldn't be doing this. And that comes from men and women alike. It's not true. You cannot keep up with an airbrushed professional
Right.
looking into the camera, acting like it's the best they've ever had. And if you notice, they never wake up in the morning without their makeup on, their hair is fine, they don't have any drool, they don't
Right.
have anything in their eyes. It's always very perfect, and they're always looking right into the camera, so you think they're looking at you. So they're looking at you, and you get the release that you need, and your wife can't keep up with that. She just cannot do it, or your husband, either one.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you could see how that would create a sense of inadequacy and all kinds of other problems. Before we go, I did want to ask you one last thing that you didn't touch on, and this is something that I'm concerned about. I don't know how much
Sure.
you know about it.
Okay.
When it comes to the birth rates in America, we've actually dropped below replacement rate. We're at 1.9, I think, now, and no society in all of human history has ever come back from lower than 1.8. So we're already on the cusp. Japan right now is actually below 1.8, and it's gotten so bad their government actually mandates that on certain days of the week they get off at 4 o'clock to be with their family, hoping that will, spur on some more births. And there is a really staggering thing in Japan right now where I think it's somewhere up to like 60 to 70% of teenage boys do not want to date, have no interest in dating. And a lot of it goes back to they have just a plethora of pornography, and also, and I get that this is creepy to talk about, but this is the world we're living in now, virtual reality.
Absolutely.
And machines that help stimulate you beyond just the visual and the audio. And what you're talking about, the problem that we have with just video and audio now, how many more times is that going to be more dangerous when you can have a digital woman that you can make look however you want to? She's only concerned with you, doesn't really care about what she wants, it's all about you. What kind of dangers are we sort of walking into with that?
I think we don't know yet, but I think it is kicking up pornography to a level we've never dealt with. The 5 or 6, I think it's 5, major virtual reality producers, I'm talking about videos, however that comes out,
Right.
met in San Francisco to talk about what's going on. And people came to see what was going on with virtual reality. And one of the things that came out of that was actually, and I read a report on this, the prostitutes in the area that usually work conventions were really upset because nobody was using them. They were going back to the room and putting on a virtual scene, and it's as if the woman or the man is actually there.
Huh.
And today, you touched on it, today there is, there are video programs where you can make up a person, looks 100% real. You can have them do whatever you want. None of it's actually happened, but you think it's happening because it's right there. Let me tell you one of the problems with that. What about child abuse and child porn? Somebody gets into virtual reality and they design children having sex with them. What do you do with that? I mean, it's not really a child.
There's no real person
There's
in the
no
real
person.
world.
No one's been abused. So a lot of laws now,
That's a question I never even thought about.
a lot of laws now are changing to not only actual physical abuse of a child, but the use of VR and other methods. I was in court the other day again. I go quite often with people
Right.
and try to help them, or whether they go to prison or not, they still need help. But one of the things this guy was being charged with was not actually child porn, but virtual porn. So he never really hurt a child, but his mindset was the same. The government thought about it the same. They've changed their laws. It was very, very interesting. You can actually go to prison in some states for watching virtual porn that doesn't even exist in reality.
So it's basically just like a video game, but it's still something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks 100% real.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Have you seen the new Star Wars?
I have not.
I know this seems like we're going off the rails, but trust me, I'm going somewhere.
Okay.
Carrie Fisher, who plays Princess Leia, actually died before the film aired, and they spliced together different pre-recorded footage that they had of her and digitally put her in the movie, and you can't tell that she's not in the movie.
Right.
They're doing the same thing. I don't know if you heard about this, but James Dean, like the original James Dean.
Yes.
They're rendering a movie where he's the star, even though he's been dead for 4 decades now. And so we really are coming close to this point that you're talking about, to where you won't be able to tell the difference between a real person and a computer-generated person.
And my understanding is that you don't realize they're not there. In virtual reality, you see these images, these ladies or men are coming to you, and you think they're there. You think they're in the room. They even have holographic porn now, which blows my mind. And it kind of, you have to have a holographic projector,
Sure.
but it kind of appears in your room. And the latest thing I read is you can literally walk around the image and you get a 360 view.
Wow.
And it's not there, it's holographic. That is spooky. We're going into areas that we've never gone before. And I guess the good side of it is the prostitutes need to be careful, because they're going to go out of business.
Well, that would be a fortunate side effect, but if the effects on the people are just as bad, then is it really a victory? I get what you're saying, but, well, thanks so much for being with us. And I know we focused a lot on men today,
Right.
and that is primarily because most of my audience is male. I realize I have some very loyal female listeners, and we appreciate y'all too, but I wanted to focus on that because this is something that, especially as somebody who works with young people, it's just so prevalent in the world today. And it's so easy because, unlike in my father's or grandfather's day, you didn't have to go to a store or go to an adult bookstore and kind of, go into the red light district, and you didn't have to go through all that process. It's literally, if you own a smartphone, it's at your fingertips anytime you want to. And I think that's what makes it so deadly as an addiction, in some ways even more deadly than drug addiction, because it's just so readily accessible all the time.
Well, Covenant Eyes and Protect Kids and several other
Right.
Fight the New Drug, or not fight, anyway, talks about porn. One of them 2 years ago said over 9 million women in the U.S. are addicted to porn. Now, how they get that figure, I don't know. But one of the ways they get that is through Pornhub. And Pornhub is one of the top 10 porn sites. And every year they brag about their stats. I mean, they brag about it. So they'll tell you, this many women are watching, they watch this long, and that they break it down by country, age, everything you can imagine, and they brag about that. And so you can find out from them, at least on their site, how many women are doing this. It's outstanding.
And not only does Pornhub break down their users, they also break down the content of their videos. And there was a report that came out, we were talking about child porn earlier. Do you know what the number one searched word on Pornhub was in 2018? Teen. They are wanting to find videos. Now, granted, we don't know exactly if there's any underage stuff going on there or not. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that you are seeing an increase in men that want women that look younger and younger and younger, and the same thing, like you said, for women as well. And so, unfortunately, that does seem to be a gateway to where they can get to that point where they would be somebody that uses child pornography. But thank you so much for being with us. Very insightful, and I know we could spend hours and hours on this because it's so timely. But thank you, Dr. Butterfield. If somebody wanted to support you, or somebody knew somebody that needed help, or they themselves need help, how would they do that? How would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can. My email address is Lou, L-O-U, @wefightporn.com.
Okay.
They can email me, or they can simply go to wefightporn.com on the internet. Look at my website, and there's a place to contact.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Lou Butterfield. We will be right back in just a minute.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. Now it's time for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will come from Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting the fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out of the presence of the Lord, which created a wicked cool light show for them to see, and totally got everyone feeling the Spirit's presence. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, even though I didn't command you to use this strange fire, I totally understand your need to express yourselves in worship and keep yourselves entertained." So Aaron therefore danced and yelled with joy, knowing that his sons were having a good time at worship. Moses called out to Mishael and Ezaphan, and the son of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away in front of the sanctuary outside of the camp, for they have fainted from being overwhelmed by the power of God's coolness." So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, because God wants us to always be happy, and as long as we're happy, He's happy. Therefore, if worship doesn't give you an overwhelming sense of euphoria, you need to find another congregation, preferably one with a more dynamic pastor and band." So they did according to the word of Moses. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the sanctuary, so that you will be able to drink more once you arrive. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, between the unclean and the clean, because when worship stops being fun or feels judgy, then it becomes profane and unclean." Wow, so inspiring. This has been a reading from the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back to Tactics, everybody. Thank you for being with us and for staying with us through the break. So we've got a few things that we have to bring up today because, of course, it was great to have Dr. Butterfield here. Lots of really interesting information, something that I think is incredibly prevalent and timely. But we are, first and foremost, a local news and politics show. And with that in mind, there is some local things that are going on right now that have national implications. Now, interestingly enough, we have been keeping a close eye on the Senate because, of course, the entire country is watching the Senate and seeing how they're going to go on impeachment. Now, I understand that the country has pretty much decided and made up their mind on impeachment, and what they have decided on is that they're incredibly bored. Like, that seems to be the sentiment that is far stronger than either whether you're for Trump or against Trump or whatever. It seems as though that the media is getting worked up into a lather over this, and the political types that are not necessarily news people, lawmakers, that kind of thing, are getting lathered up about it. But one of the reasons that you've noticed we've not covered it as much on this show is because, A, first and foremost, we are a local news show, and B, it just seems like people are tired of it. And speaking as somebody who gets paid to do this and does this for a living, I can say that I'm tired of it too. And so I get the fatigue, I understand that, but I do think it's important to bring up that we have had our senators really on the front lines of this. Shelby, to a lesser extent, but Shelby's gotten some news time about this and had his comments known on this. For those of you who are not keeping up with it, Friday, the Senate actually did announce that they are not going to be moving forward with witnesses. So they are going to have a final vote, which has not taken place yet. But as far as hearing from other witnesses, looking at different documents or evidence, they're going to basically say, no, we're going to go exclusively with what the House did. Now, to clear up some confusion here, and granted, I'm not an expert on impeachment, but I've been doing my homework as much as possible on this. Either way is okay. And by that, I don't mean that either way is equally good. I'm saying that either way is fine. Because if you look at the constitutionality of it, I've heard people from both sides of the aisle claim some kind of constitutional crisis because they do want to hear witnesses or don't want to hear witnesses. Actually, here's the thing. Witnesses are allowed, but they're not required. Now, whether or not you think they're a good idea or not, and we'll get into that in a second, that's a different matter entirely. But the point is, the Democrats are not being unreasonable or trying to go against the Constitution. I've heard so many people say, well, they should have brought those witnesses up when they were in the House, when they were in discovery, before they voted on impeachment. Yes, they should, but it's still not something that would be a breach of constitutional precedent or law to do so. They have the ability to bring up witnesses in the House and then later bring up new witnesses in the Senate. They can't bring them up for different charges, but they can bring up new witnesses, new evidence. So the Democrats wanting to do that is not in any way a violation of due process. There have been several things I think you could argue are a violation of due process. That happens to not be one of them. When it comes to the Republicans and those that are largely saying that you don't have to have witnesses, they are constitutionally correct as well. There is nothing in the Constitution that requires the Senate to call for witnesses and hear documents. And just because they're not doing that does not necessarily mean that a cover-up is afoot, because evidence has already been presented in the House. It's not that they're saying we refuse to hear any evidence, we refuse to hear any witnesses. They're saying we have no desire to do so because we feel that what was presented in the House is sufficient for us to make our decision. Now, the Democrats have been crying foul on this and saying that there is a cover-up, and I understand politically that that's something that they can make hay with, but let's be honest, you controlled the entire process when you were in the House. If you thought that this really did deserve more time and more evidence and more witnesses, why didn't you do that before having a vote? That's a perfectly legitimate argument. Now, it's also a perfectly legitimate argument for the Democrats to say that they want to open it up for witnesses in the Senate. I'm just saying that it's very reasonable for Republicans to say, if you thought that all this information was incredibly pertinent and you needed to have it considered in the case, you had a guaranteed way to do that because you guys control the House. That is a perfectly reasonable, rational thing to say. And so this brings us to the local side of it. Doug Jones has actually been almost every day. I don't know if it's every day, but it's almost every day. He's been putting out videos giving his thoughts on the impeachment trial, that kind of thing. And if you don't want to watch him, go ahead and do so. There's really nothing in there that you would not expect. He did wind up voting on witnesses just like every other Democrat on Friday. And almost every Republican voted against. The vote wound up 51-49. It needed to be 51-49 the other way in order to hear witnesses, so you needed at least 51 votes to hear that, but that did not take place. There were two Republicans that crossed the aisle, Mitt Romney and, well, technically Lisa Murkowski still has an R behind her name, so it was interesting that she voted with the Republicans, but Suzanne Collins is actually the one that crossed the line and voted with the Democrats, which again, she's kind of like Murkowski in that I don't know why she continues to run as a Republican or consider herself a Republican, but for whatever reason she does, and so technically she was one crossing lines as well. So with that in mind, it's interesting to see that Jones, our senator, did vote on witnesses despite saying that he is not somebody that is just going to vote lockstep with the Democrats. He is not somebody that is just going to do whatever Chuck Schumer tells him to do, yet on all the important votes he seems to vote for Chuck Schumer and vote with the Democrats. I mean, we saw this with the Kavanaugh hearing. There's a myriad of other things the guy has. The last time I checked, he's barely in the double digits when it comes to his Liberty score on voting. So obviously a far, far radical leftist on every issue, especially abortion. But on this, here's the thing. I think that Jones's rationale is actually solid. His stated rationale is not bad at all. Because if you're looking at the videos that he's been putting out after impeachment, if you're looking at his reasoning for why he wanted to hear witnesses, and basically he came at it from a very moderate perspective. He said, I just want to get to the bottom of this. I think that because it's a trial and I'm an attorney, that we need to understand all the aspects of it, and I don't have a problem with there being more evidence, more witnesses coming forward. His stated rationale is actually very reasonable. And his stated rationale is pretty much the same as my rationale, my actual rationale. Because I actually was in favor of hearing new witnesses. I wanted them to do so, and if I were the Republicans, if I were Mitch McConnell, or any of the others, what I would say is, yeah, take your best shot. We'll have your witnesses in. We're also going to have some witnesses that we approve in. But yeah, by all means, if you take this seriously, you've already gone through the historic process of impeaching a president, we're absolutely going to take this seriously. We're going to consider every angle. But here's what's not going to happen. What is not going to happen is what happened in the House, where one side controls everything, where one side calls all the shots. We're going to do this fair and show up the Democrats in the House. The Republicans did not do that. They did exactly the same thing that the Democrats did in the House, just in reverse. Because the Democrats, it became very clear that their message was, regardless of the evidence, we don't like Trump, we want him out, so we're going to vote to remove him from office. Now, they voted for impeachment because they can't remove him from office, but that's the end goal. We don't want him in the White House, therefore, we don't like the president, we're going to vote to impeach him. The Republicans, what they just did, regardless of their reasoning behind it, what they just showed to the world in the way that the vast majority of voters, especially ones in the middle, are going to take it, is this is all a political game. What the Republicans did is exactly the same thing the Democrats did in the House. Regardless of what their rationale behind it was, the message that was sent was, well, we like the president, we'd like him to stay in the White House, so we're going to vote against removing him. We're going to vote against hearing witnesses, and I imagine that vote is going to go exactly the same on party lines when it comes to actual voting for removal from office. And see, this is why I think that what actually should have happened is the Republicans should have opened up the floor and said, yeah, let's do this. Because there's another thing that you have to consider. The Democrats are going to be able to scream and yell and cry cover up, and they've got a point. Now, I don't think that it is a cover up. I think that what is being covered up is nothing, and in fact, the crime that is going on is actually coming from the other side, and all the Democrats, not just Joe Biden, the Democrats in general, their corruption in Ukraine, and specifically the State Department. And that's the real thing that I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of, and primarily because the Republicans wussed out again and decided that, no, we're just going to do what's politically the easiest for us, and so we're going to do that, even though I think politically they would have benefited more having the full trial. And now Republicans are going to call for impeachment again, call that there was a mistrial and the Republicans were just obstructing them. If they had had this out, if they had opened it up for the whole world to see and had where everybody was going to be looking at, yes, the testimony of nutcases and people that cannot be trusted like Lev Parnas, but also of people like Hunter Biden and the Ukraine ambassador. What's her name? Alikowski or something ridiculous like that. If we'd actually heard, they would have heard from those people too. And the thing is, since we had already heard pretty much everything that the Democrats had, which amounted to basically nothing, I won't go as far as to say absolutely nothing, but basically nothing, and certainly nothing impeachable. They already made their case in the House. And I don't think that we would have had any kind of new bombshell or anything like that. We would have gotten pretty much exactly the same thing that we got in the House. The difference is, here in the Senate, there would have been a counter message accompanying it that would have been far stronger. I think the Republicans really shot themselves in the foot here. And I think that because of that, people like Doug Jones come off as sounding as though they are the reasonable ones for taking this stance. But the question is how he votes on the impeachment, the actual removal from office, because the president's already been impeached, is that going to be at all affected? Is that at all going to affect his chances of re-election? Well, a new WPA intelligence poll of about 500 likely Alabama voters says that that is indeed the case. So I'll go ahead and bring up this graphic. This is how Alabama voters view it if Doug Jones opposes and supports removing Trump. So if he supports removing Trump, there are 35% that are going to be less likely to do so. If he opposes it, there are 64% more likely to vote against Doug Jones. There's 1% in the undecided category. So there is absolutely no question that if the Senate, and specifically Doug Jones, votes to remove Trump, that is going to severely hamper him when it comes to his view in the eyes of Alabama voters. But this is just overall. In other words, this is just what Alabama voters would hope that the Senate would vote for. This is how it relates to Doug Jones specifically. So if Jones votes to remove, they are 14% more likely to reelect him. So 14% of people are going to be happy about that. 37% are going to be less likely to reelect him. 45% say there is no difference. 4% say they aren't sure yet. So you might be tempted because of this, and I understand why. You might be tempted because of this to focus on the less likely to reelect. So there's 37% of Alabamians that say, yeah, if Doug Jones does vote to remove the president, we're going to be less likely to vote for him. I think that number is largely immaterial, because I don't think that it's completely honest. I could be wrong, but this is just me going with my political prognostication. I think the most important part of that is that there is going to be no difference. And remember that was the one that got the vast majority. 45% of Alabamians said, yep, whether he votes for Trump or against Trump, it's not going to change my vote for him. In other words, at least 45% of Alabamians already have their mind made up when it comes to Senator Jones. And I would fall into that category. It wouldn't matter if Senator Jones voted from here on like a conservative. Now, that's not going to happen. It wouldn't matter if from here on out Doug Jones voted to acquit the president. Wouldn't matter. I, like many Alabamians, already have my mind made up on Doug Jones because I've seen how he has functioned in office, and so there's no chance that I'm going to vote for him. And see, that to me is the most interesting part of this poll, and the one that is most likely to show what Doug Jones is going to do on this. I do not believe this is going to affect his vote at all. The fact that Alabamians are going to change their vote and be more likely to vote for him, more likely to vote for somebody else in this next election, I think he's going to see that 45% mark and say, it doesn't matter what I do. It really doesn't. Whether I vote in favor of acquitting the president or not, doesn't matter, because my chances of getting reelected are pretty much nothing right now. I mean, honestly, if I'm Doug Jones's political advisor and I'm looking at this poll and I'm also looking at Jones's approval ratings and looking at who he's going to be running against for the Senate, I mean, unless it's Roy Moore, and that would be the only monkey wrench in this whole thing, is if he has a repeat against Judge Moore, which I frankly just do not see happening. If I'm his political advisor, I'm going to say, Senator Jones, vote how you want to, because it really isn't going to make a difference. This is the difference in losing the election by 10% and losing the election by 30%. So what? You might as well vote the way you want to while you're here. I mean, I know that may not sound something that is all that idealistic, because of course it's not, but the senators aren't listening largely to what their constituents want unless they believe it is going to affect their reelection. And in Doug Jones' case, I believe based on the way he's voted, he's already pretty much decided, and I think rightfully so, that nothing he can do can change the outcome of that election, so he might as well vote the way that he wants to while he's there. He's basically operating as though he is a lame duck senator. And if I were in Jones' position, frankly, I'd do exactly the same thing. If I were in Jones' position, let's say that it was the reverse, and I was the conservative that I am, and I'm in, I don't know, Maxine Waters or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district or jurisdiction. I know that they're, members of the House instead of the Senate, but, go with me on this. I'm about 1,000% sure that I can't win that seat again. And frankly, like Jones, I think I'm just sitting around there trying to figure out how the heck I got into this position. But if I'm there, I'm voting the way I want to while I'm there, because there's no chance I'm going to get reelected anyway. So I think that's what's actually going to happen with Senator Doug Jones. I think he's already made that calculation. He already understands, look, this is a one-off. I might as well be able to do what I want and get my agenda through, which is a radical left agenda for Doug Jones, while I'm here. Let's go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
And for today's Daily Dose of Stupid, I know everybody's talking about it, so I'm going to talk about it. the Super Bowl halftime show. Now, you may not be surprised that it is the, I guess, category that the Daily Dose of Stupid falls into today, but I'm going to tell you why. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I do not think it is stupid to be bothered by it, because I'm not going to say the show itself was stupid, because I don't think that it was. I think that it's pretty much par for the course. I'm not saying that if you were bothered by it, that you are stupid. Because based on the very small snippets of what I've seen from it, just from newscast, I'm afraid to go and watch a clip of it online. I'm afraid that it's more risque than I'm willing to let my eyes go to. But, you know, I saw at least a clip of it, and it's basically women pole dancing and doing a striptease on national television. I'm trying to do this as delicately as possible. I don't think you're stupid at all by being bothered by that. I don't think you're stupid at all for being bothered by the fact that that was on what is normally considered a nationwide family program that should be entertaining for the entire family, that you don't have to throw your kids in a closet for 10 minutes while the halftime show is going on and then bringing them back out for the football game. I don't think that's stupid at all. What I do think is stupid is the people that didn't see this coming. The people that were shocked. Look, guys, the NFL is an uber left organization. I mean, not just with the kneeling thing and the Kaepernick, of course there was that too, but you've also got, for example, absolutely no repercussions at all for St. Louis with them doing the hands up, don't shoot thing, for, Kaepernick wearing socks with police officers dressed up like pigs. But they did deny, for example, the Dallas Cowboys having a sticker to honor the 5 police officers that were slain in the Dallas shooting on their uniform. That's too controversial, and we want to stay away from that. And the same NFL is the one that had a special event specifically carved out to try to get Kaepernick on a team again. Then it didn't happen. They have bent over backwards for that guy. And still nothing has ever come of it because of how much trouble it would be to actually have him on a team. I mean, this is the organization that you have. And I'm not just talking about political left, they're very socially left. Because here's the thing. They have an entire show dedicated to the cheerleaders of the Dallas Cowboys. That's just one team. And those outfits are not leaving a ton to the imagination. I mean, again, I saw a quick photo of what J-Lo and the other people at the halftime show are wearing. I mean, let's be honest, is it that much different than what the cheerleaders are wearing? I get that they're not pole dancing on the sidelines, but the dances they're doing aren't exactly tame either. So I'm not in any way saying that you are in the wrong or there's something wrong with you if you were bothered by this spectacle. I'm saying it's the freaking NFL. What did you expect? And I'm not trying to say that, well, you should just give up on it. And I don't watch the NFL. I'm a college football guy. But I'm just saying that this is the world that we live in. And I think that it's dumb to expect anything less. I wish that we had a world where that wasn't a concern. I wish that we had a world where you could take your kids to a football game and you didn't have to worry about mostly naked women rubbing their crotch on the camera. I wish that were a thing, but it's not. And by this point, we really shouldn't expect anything different. This kind of thing has been going on at the the Super Bowl halftime show for, I don't know, most of my life at this point, and I'm 30 years old. We should expect nothing different. The world... The servant is not greater than his master. They hated Jesus. They're going to hate us too, and they're not going to hold the same values that we do. That's just the way that it is. One minor note, though, that I will say on this subject, and this will be the end of it. I do, just like a lot of you out there, I do understand the blatant hypocrisy that's going on. Talking about how women should be empowered and that we shouldn't be sexualizing women and women are not just objects for a man's gratification. And I agree with all of those things that feminists usually say. And then they turn around and support something like this and call everyone that disagrees with it or is bothered by it a bunch of backwards prudes and, whatever else that you want to throw in there, whatever other insult they can toss at this. So yeah, there's a healthy dose of hypocrisy, but again, that too should not be something that we, as members of the body of Christ, should be at all surprised about, especially at this point when they've been doing it for, like I said, the vast majority of my life. I don't even remember a normal Super Bowl halftime show. Now, granted, I don't remember hardly any of them because I don't really watch the Super Bowl, so maybe I'm a bad example. I'm just saying that this is the world that we live in now, and while I have no problem speaking against it, I'm just saying that we should anticipate it, at least at this point in history. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Today's chaplain's report does come from the book of Jonah, and just to give you a little bit of context, I'm sure most of us are familiar with the book of Jonah, but just to give you the long and short of it, the way that this book starts out is that Jonah hears a call from God to go and preach to the people of Nineveh. They have been very wicked, and God wants Jonah to bring his word to Nineveh to tell them to stop and to change their ways. Jonah is not real thrilled about this because he's a Jew. And the Jews don't like the Ninevites. In fact, the Ninevites have been the ones that have been persecuting his people. And because of that, Jonah says, nope, not going to do it. So he takes a cruise in the opposite direction. When he sails off to Tarshish, which is his destination at this point, he's trying to get as far away from Nineveh as possible, which I've always found kind of hilarious. Jonah, who is a prophet, and is supposed to be a man of God and is supposed to know better, is like, yeah, I'll just run away from God. That'll work out real well for me. I mean, yes, I know, looking back at Bible characters, it's easy for us to waggle our fingers when we have the ability to look at it hindsight, but I don't know. With that one, I kind of look at that, I'm like, okay, even in the moment, Jonah should have known better than that God was just going to let him go, that it was just... There was going to be no repercussion for that on this side of eternity or the next. I think that we all know the rest of the story and how that goes out, but I want to focus on a very specific part of this story, and actually I want to kind of focus on not Jonah. I want to focus on a few other characters in this story as we look at Jonah 1, and in this particular episode, what has just happened is Jonah has fled from God, and now a storm has kicked up in the ship that he has taken, trying to get as far away from Nineveh as possible. And now that this storm is raging, these sailors have been trying to right the ship. They're trying to go through this storm, and it is not working, and they have cast lots to try to figure out, okay, this is an unnatural storm. Somebody is obviously angered somebody up there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to figure out what is going on. And Jonah actually gives them the answer and tells them what is going on in this particular passage. This is Jonah 1, 12 through 13. He, talking about Jonah, he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that on account of me this great storm has come up upon you." However, the men rowed desperately to return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier against them. So, when you look at the reaction of the sailors, I find this whole exchange fascinating because these sailors were not Hebrews. That is made very clear in the account by Jonah. In fact, he was trying to get away from the Israelites, away from the Hebrew people, to try to hide himself from God, which is the whole reason he's on this ship that is being manned by pagans. And that's why he has to tell them that he's a Hebrew. So these are men that are not well versed in the law at all, probably never even heard of Jonah's God. And yet they find themselves right in the middle of this dispute between Jonah and his God, who told him to do something, and Jonah acted in direct defiance to that. This is really an interesting story about obedience to God, because you'll notice that Jonah gives them instructions. He says, okay, this is how to fix it. This will solve your problem. Now, it's Not a solution that Jonah really likes, I'm sure, but at least he does have the courage and honesty to say, yep, if you throw me into the ocean, you throw me overboard, that's going to solve this storm right now. Now, the sailors, these were not timid men. These were not rookie sailors. I mean, the reason that they're on this ship, presumably, based on everything we know from the passage, is that these are probably guys that did this for a living every single day, at least most of them. And despite this, they're seeing this storm that they have never seen anything like this before, and they hear that and they're like, okay, but we really don't want Jonah to die, so what we're going to do is we are going to gather up and the Bible says row desperately. Jonah tells them a solution and say, we've got a better idea because we want to keep you safe. We don't want to just throw a guy into the ocean. So what we're going to do is we're going to just row and get out of the storm. That does not go well for them. In fact, they tried to return to land, but they obviously can't, and it says that the storm gets even worse. And I think that is such a great story for us to take into account because they knew the command of God. They had the message. Jonah had already done his part and delivered to them what they were supposed to do, and they said, we don't like that plan. We're going to come up with our own. Maybe we can fix it doing it our way. You see, that is an attitude that ensnares so many people. Because they look at one of God's commands and they think, oh, that doesn't really make sense to us, or no, that just seems too cruel, or whatever else it may be, and they say, here's our plan. We like this way better. We're going to try this. And it doesn't work. And it never does. You can never get by with God doing things your own way. Now, God does want us to be wise. He wants us to think. He wants us to come up with our own solutions whenever we can. But when he gives us a direct order, he expects obedience. And this is exactly what happened in this particular episode. God gave them the instructions and they didn't listen. And they tried doing it their way, and things only got worse. I mean, that's a great metaphor for the way that most people live their lives. They hear God's command and they think, it's pretty good, but we're going to come up with our own, and we'll try doing it this way and see how that works out for us. And spoiler alert, it never does. Now, I want you to consider all the things that we know about these sailors. First of all, we know that they were competent. It wasn't that they were bad rowers. It wasn't that they weren't strong. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They had been through storms before. Heck, this plan probably had worked at times before when Jonah wasn't there and it was just a normal natural storm. That had probably been something that had served them in the past for a different situation when God had not given them a direct command. And we could also note that there's a lot of good intention here. I mean, they hear God's command and say, well, we don't want Jonah to die. And they don't even know this guy. They have enough compassion that they look at Jonah and say, we don't want him to perish, and so we're going to try it this way first. You got to admire that. I mean, it wasn't the best course of action, but at least their heart's in the right place. At least they're trying to do the right thing. You have to look at that and say, okay, well, at least their heart was in the right place, but that really comes to the point of the lesson. It doesn't matter how many people agree with it. It doesn't matter what the intention was or how good the intention was. It doesn't matter how smart the people are or how competent they are. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, you have man's way and you have God's way. And man's way doesn't work. The only way that you can do it, especially when God has given you a direct order, is God's way. Sometimes it doesn't always make perfect sense to us. I mean, for goodness sake, I study the Bible all the time. And there's still passages where I'm kind of scratching my head and thinking, I'm not sure I understand what God was going for with that one. Or I don't understand why God did it this way when I would have done it this way. But ultimately, that's where faith comes in. You have to trust that God knows better than you, that he can see angles that you can't. And because you trust in his knowledge and his wisdom, you defer to that. You fall into his arms. You say, Lord, I don't understand it right now, but I trust you and you've got a pretty good track record, so I'm going to go with you. Sometimes that is the best way to handle things because we have to understand that our knowledge and our wisdom is finite. Humbling yourself and falling into the arms of a trusting God through loving obedience, that is always a path to success. Now, again, I don't want to waggle my finger at these guys because I know how the story of Jonah pans out. They didn't. They didn't know that God was going to keep Jonah safe. But if they had had enough faith in God to begin with, they would have trusted that whatever happened to Jonah, God was going to make it right. And we know that eventually he did, and he's going to do the same thing for our lives. That if we just follow the commands of God, we may not always understand exactly why he's telling us to do things this way or that way there in the moment. But eventually, even when it seems counterintuitive to our human understanding at the time, God is going to make it work out for us. God's plan always works. Stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2020.